Leadership is getting things done through other people. Leadership is getting things done through other people. It is not necessarily what you are doing, it's how you get other people to do what that needs to be done. And so a leader leads. A leader doesn't just bark commands and all that other kind of stuff. You think about it like a field general. Probably the greatest general America ever had was George Patton. Patton could not see every part of the battle he was fighting. He had to delegate, train, trust that those men would go and do what they were trained to do, and maybe have to call an audible on the fly and all that other kind of stuff. And that's what leadership is all about. If you're trying to get your hands in everything, you're trying to direct everything, you're just going to wear yourself out and frustrate everybody around you. It's just not going to work. So that's why it's so good when we talked about, so important, we talked about always be, slow to hire, quick to fire, long hellos, quick goodbyes. When it comes to getting people in the right places, Jim Collins likes to say in his great book, Good to Great, he says, leadership is all about finding the right people and then getting them the right seat on the bus. That's what it's all about. And that also means this: you cannot just dictate, here's how it's going to be. Frank Blake, the former CEO of Home Depot, said, your idea must be accepted to be effective. You cannot just you may have the greatest idea in the world for organization or whatever, but until you sell everyone on it, until there's what's called buy-in, it's not going anywhere. It doesn't matter how good of an idea it is. You have to sell it. It has to be accepted in order to be effective. You have to sell that idea. Well, how do you do that? You build buy-in by discussing your idea with as many people as you can, especially at the executive level. You discuss it and you ask questions. You ask what they think about it. You don't just say, hey, this is the greatest idea ever, and we're going to do it. Okay, good discussion. That's not how that works. You go, hey, I got this idea. What do you think? And then, even if, what studies have shown is just by asking that question, here's the idea, what do you think? Just by asking that question, even if they don't like the idea, and you end up implementing the idea because they feel they've had a say in the idea, they don't kick back against it so hard. So just getting that buy-in, having the idea, talking with it as many people as possible, asking what they think about it in order to get buy-in, because your idea must be accepted in order to be effective. Make sense? Great leaders ask great questions. Always be asking questions. Ask more questions than making statements when it comes to what you're doing in an organization, volunteer, church, work. Ask a lot of questions. Now, questions can be so pointed that they come across as being combative. That's not what you want to do. You want to ask truly sincere questions. That means you're going to have to think a little more. Think about, okay, what are the implications of this? What could go wrong? What could we, because you're going to have to sit there and think through what could happen. See, this was a famous study in leadership, in the leadership realm, and in books and podcasts and articles. Years ago, a textile mill in Massachusetts burnt to the ground. And immediately the CEO, because he had so much concern for his workers and family, said, we're going to immediately rebuild, and we're going to take the insurance money, and we're going to modernize the plant. And everybody went, yay, he's our hero, this is great. So nobody asked the question, okay, what happens if the market drops and we've spent all our money on this new equipment? Then what? And guess what happened? The market dropped. They had spent all their money, all their reserve cash was gone. And then what they had to do? They had to close down. Nobody asked the question, okay, but what happens if great leaders ask great questions? What that CEO should have done was say, okay, but all right, we've got this insurance money coming in, we've got this much cash in reserve. Now, what happens? We rebuild and the market goes down, then what do? He never just stopped to ask that question. This happens at churches too. Do you know that this may shock some of you? Churches typically have the worst reputation when it comes to credit. Because most churches do not pay their bills. This is a great opportunity. They spend all their money and go, and we'll just trust the Lord to bring it all in. There is a big difference between trusting the Lord and jumping off the temple hoping the angels will save you. And typically what I see churches doing is making that dive all the time. And that's silly. You know, as much as I ram heads with my dad, one thing he's really good about is we're putting this much money away just in case. Great leaders always prepare for those contingencies. That, okay, what happens when everything goes to... Also, remember this, questions do a lot. You should pay attention to questions. Questions reveal value. The questions you ask show or will show the kind of person you are, what you really value. For example, let's say that I tell my son, which I do, son, as long as you give your best, as long as you do your best, like when he was playing Little League, I was like, as long as you do your best, I'm proud of you. As long as you do your best. Then he comes home and I go, how many hits you get? What am I revealing? I care about the results, not the effort. And so questions reveal those values. You need to stop and ask, as a parent, grandparent, coworker, whatever, what kind of questions are you asking? Because it's showing people what you really value. And you should reflect on that because it shows you what you really value. And this comes back to that emotional intelligence thing again, where you just have to kind of train yourself to align your questions with what you should value. You know, I'm preaching this morning, and one of the things I'm talking about this morning, if I remember to, because a lot of stuff I say is just off the fly, but one of the things I'm talking about this morning is, you know, we do this. We spend so much of our time worrying about whether our kids will be successful and so little time worrying about whether or not they will be faithful to the Lord. And that's sad. And we all do it. We all do it. I have far more, I just caught myself doing this last week when I was talking to my son. I said, I spent so much time talking to him about how he was doing in school and so little time asking him about church, whether he was praying. You can't assume those things. You absolutely cannot assume. You have got to be proactive and do that. And I tell this to people all the time. If you're a parent, grandparent out there, I would absolutely encourage you to do whatever you could to send your kids to a Christian college. Because at secular colleges, they are being indoctrinated. 75% of Christian kids who go to secular colleges leave the faith. 75%. You are paying money to have your children deconverted and indoctrinated. Now, why would you do that? I mean, it makes no sense. You know, now my son, he can go to Liberty University for free, and he keeps saying, Dad, I don't want to go to Liberty University. I want to go to he wants to go to film school, he says right now. He's a teenager. That'll change or it might change. But he's like, I want to go to film school. I want to go to NYU or UCLA. I was like, great, you're paying for it. He goes, I'm not paying for that. I'm not paying for you to go be indoctrinated. You can go to Liberty University. They've got a film school, and you can go there for free. Because he's at Liberty Christian Academy. I said, you can go there for free. So guess what? I'll pay for your books. I'll pay your rent. I'll help you buy a car, do all kind of stuff if you go to Liberty. If you go to NYU, I'll pay for the flight home for Christmas, but other than that, I don't know what you want. It ain't happening because I'm not paying for him to be indoctrinated. I'm not going to do it. You need to understand this, and leaders are terrible at this. Leaders typically think they have to be good at everything. You're not going to be. No one is good at everything. Remember when Michael Jordan tried to play baseball? How'd that go? And he was awful. He was absolutely awful. Great, possibly the greatest basketball player of all time, and he was a mediocre baseball player. He hadn't had much of a career since then either. He'd blown his mouth off and making a jerk out of himself. So it's just, you are not going to be good at everything. You need to find your gifts, your flow, remember we talked about that? That's that thing that you find that, oh man, this just excites me. I love this. I'm passionate about this. I'm happy I'm doing this. You need to find that flow, and you need to focus like a laser on that. This is what I love to do. Now, how can I make a living out of it and lead this way? And that's what you need to do. Now, every once in a while, you're going to have to step outside of your comfort zone. And that's okay, but understand when you step outside your comfort zone, you don't need to lead there. You need to find somebody who's good at that, and you just help them out. You don't have to lead where you're not gifted. Andy Stanley said this, he said, the less you do, the more you accomplish. And the less you do, the more you enable others to accomplish. You will accomplish more by doing what you're gifted at, and you will help others do the same by keeping your hands out of their area of expertise and just supporting them.
Does that work with the laundry too?
Does that work with the laundry? No, sorry, Joey. You just did.
Applies quite well.
No. In fact, I'm going to have a conversation with Mallory about you leading that laundry charge. You be the leader there. In fact, that's right up your mental alley, Joey, right there. John Maxwell said, you are most valuable when you add the most value. You are most valuable when you add the most value, and you do that by doing what you do best and not messing with everything else. I met with a leader a couple weeks ago. I said, how are things going? And he said, it's just that I have a hard time. It used to be I was doing all this stuff, and now I've got to delegate things out, and it just makes me nervous, and I'm just going to have serious conversations with him. You're going to have to deal with that, bub. And if we got to talk, this is either your problem or you've hired the wrong people, one or the other. But you've got to be able, you get the right people and you trust them to do their job. Questions so far? Make sense? All right, moving on. This goes for all of you, including you who are retired. You must control your calendar or your calendar will control you. I'm getting lots of nods and smiles. Yeah. You must control your calendar or your calendar will control you. One of the best things you can do is sit down and map out your days, your weeks, so forth. Make sure that what is urgent, what is important, not just necessarily what is urgent, is on there. If you listen to too many people, there are all kinds of things that are urgent going on, but you need to do what is important. Bless you, right? What is important? Do that first. And that primarily means, this is Christian leadership, that you're putting aside time every day to read your Bible and pray. And going to church. Too often today, the average churchgoer in North America now only goes to church once a month. And they think that's going to church. That's not going to church. Okay?
I didn't have anything else planned.
Yeah, well, and they just, and I understand there are vacations and people get sick, but unless you're sick or on vacation, I'm not talking about a permanent vacation, I'm not talking about, I'm retired now, it's all vacation. No. Be at church every single week and put time every day. Put God on your calendar every day and then see if there's anything that's important enough to knock that off. I doubt there's going to be. Only time I've had, that time I have for prayer and study, the only time something has knocked that off is somebody's dying. And they want me there. And thankfully that doesn't happen too often. But it does happen. Howard Hendricks said, the secret of concentration is elimination. Take things off your calendar. Quit doing stuff that doesn't matter. Get that out of there. You can get pulled in all kinds of different directions. And increasingly we have this thing where, it drives me crazy, parents allow their kids to do a dozen things. And if they've got a bunch of kids, they're just going in all kinds of different directions. And then the grandparents have to step in, and then they're going all kinds of different directions. Grandparents, say no. You're just enabling it. Parents, do not allow your kids to sign up for a dozen things. I used to tell my son, you get one, pick one. What do you want? You want baseball, you want karate, what's it going to be, but you only get one. And that's just the way it is. You can fill up your calendar with a bunch of stuff that you do that accomplishes nothing. You ever had those days when you get home, it's like, I've been so busy, and you look back, but you didn't do anything? You're going to have too many of those days. You need to knock stuff off and concentrate on what's really important. Make sense? Control your calendar will control you. How do you deal with a liar? Well, I've worked in politics, Hollywood, law, and ministry. So I have more experience with dealing with liars than all of you combined. Oh, well. Let me tell you something. 2 years on Capitol Hill will equal 20 years of everybody else's existence. So, yeah, no. Hold on. Now, despite what you see on TV, the whole science of lie detection is actually weak. There is no science of lie detection. It does not exist. It absolutely, positively does not exist. What was the show, Lie to Me, or whatever's on TV? That's junk science. It's absolute junk science. There's not a court in this country that will admit it for a reason, because all the evidence shows that it's too weak. My wife doesn't like that, but it's true. It's junk science. Sorry. Even lie detectors are not actually reliable. All lie detectors do is monitor whether you're nervous or not. You can get nervous just by being hooked up to a lie detector. I mean, they sit there, you got a light in your face and all kind of stuff. They go, now just calm down. Oh, yes, this is what I do at home. No big deal. It's what I do to relax. Lie detectors are not admissible in court. The science of lie detection is not admissible in any court in the United States because there is absolutely no science to it whatsoever. It's junk science. So you cannot detect lies. Do not go in thinking, oh, well, I've watched Lie to Me. Now I know when someone's like, no, you don't. All you're going to do is falsely accuse somebody. They're going to get mad at you and all that kind of nonsense. You cannot always detect lies, but you can encourage honesty. Here's what the science does say. That if you are transparent with people, if you are open and honest and transparent with people, there is a natural inclination for them to do the same back. So if you're just really honest and transparent with others, now that doesn't work every time. Some people are just jerks. I mean, they just are. They're just selfish jerks. And frankly, after a while, that just reveals itself anyway. And you just know you can't trust that person. You know, there are some people in this town who I know who I like. I wouldn't buy an apple off of. You know, and that's just the way it is. You know that. But there are others that all of us will have an inclination to lie, to cover ourselves, to make ourselves look better. When we actually go to the work to say, yeah, I struggle with this, I'm not doing well with this, blah, 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 people usually respond in kind. And so you can encourage that kind of thing, but you're not going to, I don't care what the TED Talks say or that kind of stuff. You cannot, it's one of the first things I learned as a prosecutor is you can't admit any of that stuff into evidence. And there's a good reason why. But in the end, when you're dealing with people, always choose trust over suspicion, especially with your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. Choose trust over suspicion. Now, you may get burned. There's a guy named Jesus who got burned by 12 guys. Okay, that happens. But you should choose trust over suspicion. And that's tough for me because I told you where I came from. I mean, I was working in Hollywood at 17, on Capitol Hill at 22. And, you know, you're surrounded by liars, but it's in people who are just wholly, you know, devoted to themselves and furthering their own agenda. But you just have to kind of take a breath, and this is what you do. When you're faced in difficult conversations, ever had one of those difficult conversations? Things can get heated quick. The way you keep it from getting heated, here's what I used to do. When I was a trial lawyer, I would take my clients before a deposition, before I took them into court, and I'd always tell them, look at my hand. Don't answer the question until I go like this. And the reason I did that was so that they could take a breath, take a second, and calm down. If you're in a conversation and you stop and you take a breath and then talk, it's less likely to escalate into something ugly. And remember, going back to our first week when we talked about marriages, attack the issue, not the person. Always attack the issue, not the person. The moment you've gone into name calling, you've both lost. Take a breath. Just take a breath. We talked about getting involved in the community, and we all should in some way, shape, or form, but you have to be smart when you do that. Check out the organization thoroughly before you volunteer for an organization. And just be smart. Like, for example, if you have a desire to feed the hungry, that's a good thing. Do not give people on the street cash. Ever. And this is coming. I'm not saying this. This is my own opinion. There's a great book called Under the Overpass about two ministers who made themselves homeless for a summer, lived among the homeless in two different cities. You know what they said? 90% of my friends who were homeless were drug addicted, and the moment they got cash, they went to go get drugs. So he said, we were homeless, I've lived with the homeless, my passion is helping the homeless, don't ever give them money, ever. Give them food. If you feel that way, drive through the drive-thru, get them a bag of food, here's some food, feeding them is great, giving them money is stupid. Don't do it. Do not do it. Questions about that? Okay. And again, if you're going to lead anywhere, you must remember reality is your friend. That means you have to be open to criticism of yourself and the organization and not get hostile. Again, that's when you take that breath. When somebody comes in and says, you know what your problem is. And you get those, right? There's always that person out there, but so be it. Andy Stanley has what he wrote out his commandments of current reality. How you know what the reality is. Number one, thou shalt not pretend. Don't sit there and try to talk yourself in that the situation is different than what it is. Thou shalt not turn a blind eye to a problem. Thou shalt not exaggerate. Thou shalt not shoot the bearer of bad news. Seen this so often. Thou shalt not hide behind numbers. Well, but we're doing this right now. So we grew from last quarter and we've got this. So what? There's a problem. There's a problem. You can be a growing organization and have a problem. I was with an organization that had a record fundraising year, but because they added some numbers and shifted some things around like they shouldn't have, they came up $2 million short anyway. And they had a record year. Don't hide behind the numbers. Do not ignore constructive criticism. And do not isolate yourself. Those are Andy Stanley's 7 commandments for making sure that you know what the reality is in your life, in your organization. It doesn't mean the criticism, is always valid. It can be, you can get bad criticism. I've had that. One of the things people tell me is, I get this all the time, when you're preaching or teaching, you talk too fast. Well, there's a reason I do that. Studies show that if you talk about a beat or half a beat quicker than you normally talk, you keep attention spans of most people better. Some people you will lose, but for the majority of people, you will keep their attention. When you preach and teach, there's nothing worse than having somebody up there. I had a professor like this in college. Turn to page 301. Oh my gosh, it's like Ambien, isn't it? I mean, goodness sakes. So, you can get bad advice, and you really should try to, seek out the wise counsel of others. And this is, as we're going to see here in a second, I'm get my Bible app out here. You're going to see that seeking the advice of others, wise counsel is actually biblical. If you got a Bible, you can go to Proverbs 1, as a matter of fact. That's where we're going to go here in just a second. Proverbs 1. And this is what, Andy Stanley, said this. He said, leadership is not about making decisions on your own. It is about owning the decisions once you make them. So you seek counsel, but understand that once you make the decision, you're on the hook. And that's just the way it is. Proverbs 1:5 says this. and you can look at other of these Bible verses, Proverbs 12:15, 15:22, there are a bunch of them. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtains guidance. Seek advice. Seek the advice of people who have been there, done that. Seek the advice of others. One of the hardest things for me, in ministry, I've only cried a couple times. One of the times where I just broke down was my mentor from the time I was in seminary up into 2011 was a guy by the name of Charles Seibert. We called him Chainsaw Charlie. He was over 6 feet tall, had a voice his voice was an octave lower than God's. I mean, it was just, he had this real deep voice. And Chainsaw Charlie was a licensed professional counselor, had his doctorate, and he was my mentor. I worked for him the 3 years I was in seminary, and then after I left seminary, we had sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, a phone call where he would call and check up on me and pray for me and give me advice. He's the one who used to tell me all the time. I'd say, well, maybe, Matt, reality is your friend, and he would say that. He was the kind of guy, and this is rare, you need to find somebody in this in your life. He was the kind of guy who could tell you were wrong and it didn't make you mad. That kind of person. He was that kind of person. And you need to find people like that. He certainly poured into me over and over again. Is finding a good mentor. A good mentor, if you want to call him a coach, will help you close the gap between your potential and your performance. A good mentor or coach will help you close the gap between your potential and your performance. That's what you're looking for. That's what you're looking for. Now, understand that, a lot of these folks are busy. A mentor's not going to meet with you every day, or, he's not going to be on call 24/7. If they're worth anything, they probably got another 12 of you somewhere they're trying to help, and they got their own life. But once a month, for maybe half hour, is a good thing to do. And you have to be honest with them. I tell people, I tell people all the time, I sit down with people at counseling. More people come in to me for counseling and lie. And I'm like, what do you want me to do? You want me to help you with your fantasy? How am I going to fix a fantasy? I can't help you fix a fantasy. I need to deal with reality. You need to tell me what's going on. And you're not going to shock me. I've been shocked. I've been doing this for 17 years. You do this long enough. You hear it all. Now, I've heard some weird stuff. I mean, weird stuff. I had early on in ministry, there were a couple of times I was like, whoa, good luck with all of that. Yeah. Whew. Goodness sakes. But it's, you find that mentor, you listen to them, you be brutally honest with them. And by being brutally honest with them, what's going to happen is you're going to be more honest with yourself. The more honest you are with yourself, the more you're going to grow. That emotional IQ is going to grow, which is what you want. You're going to start catching yourself doing things that you shouldn't be doing. And you continue to grow by reading great books, journals. I subscribe to any leader I subscribe to Harvard Business Review. It's expensive, but it's worth it because the articles in there are just really, really good. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I don't listen to the radio when I'm driving. That's a waste of time. An absolute waste. All the great music, they stopped making great music in 1990. It's all junk. And so it's all crap. And so it's just, I literally have almost nothing on my playlist from beyond maybe 92. A few maybe squeaked in there. And the only time I listen to music is when I'm working out, because the rest of the time, if I'm driving, I'm listening to audiobooks or I'm listening to podcasts. And there are great podcasts out there. If you really want to learn to be a leader, Andy Stanley has a monthly podcast that's very good. And in fact, the podcast is very good. It's about a half hour long. So, typically your drive to work and back, you can polish one off in one day. Andy Stanley is a preacher of a church in Atlanta of about 30,000 people. He runs the Catalyst Conference, which is the largest Christian conference in North America. And so Andy writes great books, and he has a lot of great leaders. He surrounds himself with great leaders. Like Frank Blake, the former CEO of Home Depot, is in his church. There are a lot of people that are in his church. Jeff Foxworthy is a member of his church. And so he has these people around him, and he's constantly absorbing leader. He's constantly changing things. He's just a high impact leader. He's the son of Charles Stanley. And so he has a great podcast. A guy named, it's a weird spelling, so you may have to write Craig Groeschel. Craig Groeschel is an innovative Christian leader. He has Life Church TV. Life Church TV is primarily a church online. They have, and they keep track of where it's going, but they live broadcast their sermon series and everything online, and they have, I don't know how many tens of thousands of people all around the world, some in Africa, who gather in houses and put a laptop up there and watch the service and worship with them. And so Craig Groeschel is a great leader. He has a monthly podcast. It's very, very good. Probably the best, in my opinion, though, is Tom Rainier. Now, he focuses more on churches and pastors. Andy Stanley and Craig Groeschel, their leadership stuff you can apply anywhere. Business, nonprofit, whatever. And Craig Groeschel, by the way, wrote one of the best books on marriage I've ever read. He and his wife co-wrote a great book on marriage. But Tom Rainier is probably the leading kind of church guy out there. He's the president and CEO of Lifeway. Heard of Lifeway, the Christian bookstore and so forth. But Lifeway doesn't just sell books and stuff like that. Lifeway also does a lot of research on the church. And so if you want to know what's going on in the church, Lifeway is a great place to go. Tom Rainier's stuff. And his blog is great too, because every once in a while, he'll just put stories in there just to mix things up. Like he'll put, one of the blog posts was unbelievable things that have happened at funerals. I'll tell you one of them. This is too good. Okay, now, typically, when you have an honor guard at a funeral, you're not using live rounds, right, Stan? Okay. Well, somebody forgot. So this one guy was in the honor guard, and he had a live round in his rifle. At the same time they were having that graveside service, at the other graveside service right over there, they were releasing doves. Guess what happened? He at least got a dove. I mean, he's probably a good skeet shooter, I would guess. I don't know. But anyway, he got one. Either that or it died of a heart attack. All they know is they watched this thing just go down and onto the ground at the graveside service. And so he has stuff like that on there every once in a while. Go the strangest things that have happened at weddings. That was interesting. He said he had pastors who said they showed up for a wedding and all the guests and the bride and groom were in Star Wars costumes, and they didn't tell the pastor beforehand. He just showed up, and instead of the bride's march, they played the theme from Star Wars. He's like, and then they crossed lightsabers instead of exchanging rings, and he's like, okay, If you talk to dad's had grooms throw up on the bride. Grooms pass out, brides turn and run. He's had all of that stuff, because I don't know how many thousands of weddings he's done, since 1959. He's done so many of them. Sometimes he's just had to go. He's had it at funerals too. He looks over and he can see what the groom's about to do. He just goes, come on. Catch you, and then we'll get you, get the smelling salt, and he's had that happen. Funerals, I tell you, I've had, because my freshman year in college, before I went to work in politics, and the few months I had in that gap, I worked at a funeral home. We had a funeral one evening where the wife was there and the girlfriend was there. And they got into a fist fight in front of the open casket. And the guy had died of a heart attack, but with a big grin on his face that they could not get off of him. So these two women are fighting in front of this body with this Joker grin on his face. I mean, oh man, yeah. And I had this one time. I used to go on call, so you go pick up a body and you bring it in. No one told me about this because they don't want to tell you about it, because they want to see how you react the first time you see a dead body move. Because they will move. And so we had an old lady on the slab, and all of a sudden she twitched. Now, if somebody told you that I screamed like a 2-year-old girl, they're lying. It was like a 3-year-old girl at least. But anyway, I was like, zombie apocalypse. Anyway, Those podcasts are very, very good to listen to. They only have, the Craig Rochelle and Andy Stanley, they only come out about once a month. If you read anything, the best books I think anybody should have are one, Start With Why by Simon Sinek, the little book, Start With Why. Starting with your why is so important. And in fact, I saw a baptized version of this. I was listening to a podcast with the head of a ministry over in London, England. And he says he's got a book coming out on kind of a Christian version of Know Your Why. He helps mentor millennials. And he says the number one thing millennials need to know is, why do I do what I do? Why, what do I want to do and why? Another one, Emotional Intelligence. This is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman has become a classic. It's not easy reading. It's kind of thick. And he's a secular guy. So some of the stuff in there, you're going to be like, well, it's a product of evolution or whatever. And you just have to ignore that nonsense. But the rest of the stuff is really good. And there's a follow-up book by two other guys called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And the last book I'd recommend is just called Grit by Angela Duckworth. Grit's a little book. My wife and I watched her TED Talk. Amazing story that she has. She was in a car wreck and she actually had some brain damage so that her IQ dropped, and she'd already been accepted to Princeton. And she thought she should just give up, but she had a smart mentor at Princeton said, fake it till you make it, and you'll be fine. And she did. And now she has a PhD from Ivy League, and she's a leader. And one thing she teaches is, the reason I recommend these three books is because leadership experts now agree that there are three big things to becoming a leader, to being successful in anything you do. One is to know why you do what you do. Be absolutely clear about that vision. Number two is to have high emotional intelligence, to be able to see yourself as others see you and work on those things that annoy others. And three, grit, perseverance, to be able to get through whatever you have to get through. Those are the three keys to success in any endeavor. Those are biggies. She's the one, Angela Duckworth is the one who taught me, and said, always with children, grandchildren, always praise effort, not talent or results. Always praise effort, not talent or results. People can get lazy and try to rely on talent. People, the biggest impediment to future success is past success. Because you think, I got this. And you don't learn. When I ran my very first campaign, 1992, I was actually the political director for a congressional campaign, and we lost. And I had a mentor at the time. He's a guy who actually, he had run John Kasich's very first campaign back in 1978 for a state Senate run. And he'd run several congressional campaigns. He took me to breakfast, and he said, this is an opportunity. I said, opportunity for what? For me to start drinking? And I mean, what kind of, and he said, this is an opportunity. He said, because when you win a campaign, you think you did everything right, and you don't learn from it. When you lose a campaign, you think you did everything wrong, and you learn from it, and you grow, and you become better at it. He said, failure is sometimes the greatest teacher you can have. And so that's why you praise effort, not results or talent. Always, always. But in the end, and we'll end with this, we'll quit here in a minute, work on your character, because your character is your destiny. Your character is your destiny. A certain presidential candidate is learning that the hard way this weekend with the news that your character is destiny. It will come back to haunt you. And you have to understand something, folks. We're in an age where privacy is almost non-existent. Privacy is almost there's no such thing as being off the record anymore. There is no such thing. It's just the way it is. And you can sit there and go, that's not right. Well, in my day, well, this ain't your day. And so what? That's the reality is your friend. Don't do anything you don't want posted on Facebook. That's why I tell young people anymore. Don't do anything you don't want posted, and anything you post on Facebook will be there forever. At least till Jesus returns, because I don't think Jesus is going to keep Facebook when he returns. I think it's one of the first things he's going to eliminate in the new heavens and new earth. What we do, we'll get to the devil in a second. Get rid of Facebook first. Go on. It's all social media. Go on. Get those smartphones out of here. One of the ways you address this is ask yourself with your character, what do you fear? What do you fear? We do a lot of things out of fear. We lie out of fear. You know, we do a lot of things out of fear. And so you ask yourself, what do you fear? Because you need to address that at some point. It doesn't mean that you can get rid of it. You just need to be conscious of it. You don't have to get rid of it. Cus D'Amato, the great boxing trainer who trained Floyd Patterson, Mike Tyson before he went crazy. In fact, many people say that Mike Tyson went crazy because Cus D'Amato died, and Cus D'Amato was the only person who could tell Mike Tyson what to do because he was a father figure to him. Pretty much adopted him off the streets of Brooklyn. Cus D'Amato used to tell Mike Tyson all the time, the difference between the hero and the coward is not what they feel, but what they do. The difference between the hero and the coward is not what they feel, but what they do. It's persevering through, knowing that fear, recognizing that fear, and pushing through it. I got the great privilege to sit down. He died a few years ago, but I got to know him very well. There was a man who lived just out in the boonies past Hawking Hills. And he gave very generously to ADF when I worked for ADF. And so I'd go see him every couple of months. And I loved to go see him. We'd sit on his porch, had this beautiful view of the valley and the woods. And he had stormed Omaha Beach on D-Day. And he told me that story. He said that he had to drive a vehicle off of one of the landers and onto the beach. And he said he got off and he got stuck. He got stuck with machine gun fire coming down. He said that's the most scared he's ever been. And he said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Got out and pushed." He said, "What was I going to do? Sit there and wait to die?" He said, "I got out and pushed." He said, "Come on, let's get this thing unstuck and get it moving." And I said, "You were scared?" He goes, "Of course I was scared. We were all scared." He said, "There one of us didn't pee or poop our pants." He said, "We all did." He said, "But we did it anyway." Because we've been trained to. And yeah, it's just the difference between the hero and the coward is not what they feel, but what they do. Anyone who's fought, has been scared. It happened. George Patton used to say that he was so afraid of going into battle, of being a coward instead of a hero. This kind of explains who George Patton was, because he was crazy, but he was brilliant, but he was nuts. And when he was a cadet at a military academy, he would walk behind the targets at the rifle range and pistol range, and he would hold his head up as long as he could, waiting for someone to shoot, to try to get the courage up to face a bullet. Now, none of his commanders knew he was back there behind those targets. If they did, they'd have ripped him a new one. But he was so afraid. It was, I've got to be willing to face a bullet. I've got to be willing to face a bullet. So he would do that all the time. And just wait. And he'd hear the click and wait and then duck. But he just wanted to build that up to face that fear. He knew that was his number one fear. And then, of course, he got to the point where he'd literally go out in front of a German fighter plane and try fire 45 at it. Well, come on, he was, but he trained himself to be that way. We have to find our fears and train ourselves to deal with them. And if there's a blessing, because the number one fear people actually have, number two is death. Number one is public speaking. I always thought that was weird. Because that means that more people would rather, be in the casket at a funeral than giving the eulogy. I think that's kind of strange, but you face that fear. And so if your fear is death, here's one of the blessings, it really is, of sickness and growing old, is that it prepares you for that. It helps prepare you to face that. Because we're all going to face it one day. Unless Jesus returns, we're going to face it. And, on a long enough timeline, the survival rate is 0. It's just the way it is. We're all going to cash that check in one day. And you hold tight to the gospel. You hold tight to the gospel. Frank Turek said it last week. I don't know who was here last Sunday to hear Frank Turek. I thought he did a great job. But, Frank likes to say, Christians don't die, we just change locations. Yeah. Everybody changes locations, but if you're a Christian, your change of location is actually better, not worse. And so the fear of death is that, you have to get yourself into a mindset. Death is an evil thing. You don't want to rush to it. It's like, yeah, bring it on. It's an evil thing, because if we have breath in us, that means we have a job to do. We have a mission to accomplish for our King Jesus. And so every day is an opportunity to do that. And this is a spiritual battle that's as easy enough as just you pray, you read Scripture, and you say, hey, you want to come to my church? I'll meet you there. You can sit with me. Not that hard of a battle to fight, folks. It's really not. Now, I'm going to be talking about our adversary this morning. We start a 4-week sermon series on Satan. Now, the reason we're doing that, I'm preaching on Satan as the rebel and the spirit of rebellion, the father of the spirit of rebellion this morning. Next week, Dad's going to be talking about Satan as the accuser. The week after that, Rick's going to be talking about Satan as the liar and the father of lies. And then I'll be doing a sermon series, George will like this, the 4th week, called Hell Yes. About the reality of hell and so forth. But the reason we're doing that is, look, you can, and C.S. Lewis is right about this, there's 2 equal and opposite errors when it comes to Satan and demons. You can dismiss them out of hand, or you can become obsessed with them. The reality needs to be somewhere in between, because the problem is the North American church rarely ever talks about Satan anymore. But if you read the New Testament, Paul and Peter and Jesus talk about Satan a lot. Paul actually says, know his schemes. Peter says, warns. He said, understand, he's trying to devour you. And so really, we call this sermon series Piercing the Darkness, but really it's Know Thy Enemy, and how he fights, and how to fight against him.
Christ Community meets on Saturday at 5 p.m. and Sunday at 10:30 a.m. For more information, visit www.christcommunity.net or check out our Facebook page.